So what is organic outreach? Well, Kevin Harney, who wrote the book Organic Outreach, has this quote: "Organic outreach is what happens when evangelistic vision and action become the domain of every ministry in a church and a commitment of every member of the congregation." A year ago, we took a pulse survey, and one of the things that came out on that pulse survey is that we had a commitment to evangelism. We may not have been quite sure how to go about it, but even as a stable church, we had a commitment to evangelism, which is good because even the healthy missional churches have a commitment to evangelism, and that's where we want to be. The question is, well, how do we go about it? When you think about Oak Harbor, only 20% of the people in Oak Harbor even think about going to church. So think about all those people who you pass on a Sunday and you think, well, what are they doing? They're not even thinking about it going to church. We have this huge ministry field, 80%, and we just have to totally change our thinking about how we're going to go about that. Pastor Matt felt this was so important that we needed to get started on this right away. And so he took Kathy Vanderleest, who was now our outreach coordinator, and they went down to Shoreline Community Church in Monterey, California, to Kevin Harney's church. They spent a week there learning about outreach, organic outreach, natural outreach to the community. And Kathy, in fact, has implemented that program and has been meeting with each group within our church. You might think of certain groups such as our youth group, our children's ministry, a natural part for outreach, but we're talking about every area, every committee, and every organization within our church. Down to the food, people who are doing the food. How can we use that as outreach? The goal is to change our mindset. Instead of looking inward to what can the church do for me, to looking outward and how can we draw people into the church. And we can do this in a number of different ways. Kathy's goal is to meet with each group and increase the temperature, the vitality within each group. She meets with them every month to see how we can go about it. How can we redirect the ministry in different directions in order to reach out to the community? So you might be thinking, well, that's great for these committees, but what can I do as an individual? What can each individual can do? Everyone in our church has a testimony, has a story. Share your story with some of those people you meet every day. 43 years ago, I was a new Christian, and my relationship was starting to slip. Ann had gone back east. I was kind of on my own, and I could see my relationship with Christ going in the wrong direction. And for whatever reason, I committed to taking somebody with me to church every Sunday. Well, that made a huge difference. And why? Because I started seeing everybody I met in a totally different light. In fact, it even happened today as I was walking into the church parking lot. Coming into the church parking lot, there was a young man on a skateboard. And I thought, well, instead of chewing him out for being on a skateboard, what if I invited him to church? So we're talking about a total mindset change, and that can happen at the committee level or it can happen at the individual level. We've got this incredibly dynamic pastor who preaches the best sermons in Oak Harbor. And in fact, just 2 weeks ago, we had 2 people up for baptism. And how did that happen? It's because somebody in the congregation decided to ask them to come to church 6 months ago, and that totally changed those two people. They are completely different today as a result of that. So think of that. Everybody in the church can do that. We talked a little about Twin Falls Community Church. 30 years ago, they were a small church in a farming community, and they made a commitment. Their pastor, Brian Vriesman, made a commitment to start, instead of looking inward, to start looking outward. Well, today, they can't knock down the walls fast enough to keep up with the growth in that church. It is that dynamic and happening that quickly. The same thing can happen in our church. This past weekend, we had Picnic and Praise, and we had our band right out in the parking lot, and I talked to a number of people and how thrilled they were and how excited they were to have our band, our incredible worship team out there playing music, and you could do that right here in Oak Harbor. But as we were playing that music, and I was just getting kind of high in the spirit, I looked up and down the street and I looked at all this land that belonged to First Reformed Church. And I had this vision that within 10 years, all that land was going to be taken up in ministry in something very special. And how would that happen? Because instead of looking inward at what the church could do for me, we would start looking outward on how we can organically, in a very natural way, bring the gospel to Oak Harbor.